Hi everybody. Just a couple more thoughts since we last talked to try and put things in perspective for us, to give us a sense of hope. First of all, I'd like to begin by thanking all of you who have been calling the rectory, checking on me, writing me notes, people offering to provide me with food. I received a package of medicinal cookies today, which I'm very grateful for. But remember, we don't want our pastor to get too fat. But since the last time we just had a little bit of a chat here in the Nerve Center, my prayer room, and you saw at the beginning of the video what I see every time I pray: the Blessed Sacrament, the relics of St. John Vianney, the patron saint and priest, St. John Neumann, the priest of our Schuylkill County Coal Regions. There is St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, very special to me, the firstborn American saint. We have St. Peter and Paul. We have a numerous amount of saints there on the altar, and then of course, as we talked last time about St. Aloysius Gonzaga and a relic of St. Aloysius Gonzaga. But on the parish webpage for comments and the parish email, I've received, some questions, and I'd like to try and maybe see if I can address them. But one was in regard to a phone conversation I had just the other night with a nurse. And she is a mother of 2 children, and she hasn't seen her children since we began the process of self-isolation. She works her shift, she comes home, she sleeps on the sofa in the den, and the rest of the family is upstairs isolated for her. She talks to them through texts, on the phone, through the cellar door. They are very kind, and they make her meals, although I'm sure they're not as good as the meals that Mom makes. But she said through all of this that she feels like a leper. She feels compelled to do what she's doing. Every day that she goes into work, she never knows what's going to happen. Will there be someone that is tested positive on the floor? Will there be someone who came in, they weren't sure, and now has been tested positive? All of that uncertainty and this fear of going back and taking it back to her family whom she loves becomes difficult. And as she said in her own words, she feels like a leper. So I just want to address that in a few different ways today in our little chat. Yesterday was April 3rd, and on April 3rd, 14 years ago, my mom passed. It was a very difficult day for me to experience the death of someone who actually meant the world to me. I still feel at times that my mother was the heart of my vocation, and that when I didn't finish my prayers, she finished them for me. I had prepared for her death because of the fact that, through the kindness of Dr. Alawalia and Dr. Reimer, who were fabulous working with me and my family and my mom, they prepared us for what was going to happen. And the fabulous hospice workers that came into the house to care for Mom, along with my sister and myself. But when Mom died that morning at 9:43, it was a terrible feeling of loneliness and isolation that came over top of me. I knew that I would never be able to kiss her again, to hug her, to spend time with her. And at 5:30 that morning, when I gave my mom her last dose of morphine, she looked at me and she mouthed, "I love you very much." And I will always have that image in my mind. Isolation is something that scares us. We need people. We need to be around people. And death, in the physical sense that we are aware of it, leaves us all by ourselves and all alone. And now when the governor is asking us to stay at home, to self-isolate, there is still that inner sense of us that needs to socialize, that needs to be with people. Even myself and members of the Recre staff, we feel that we have to be here for you. We want to be able to provide you with services, and yet at times our hands are tied and there's so much that we can't do. That sense of isolation is bothering us. And yet the only way that we're going to flatten this curve and prevent the spread of the disease and to bring the disease down to proportions that the doctors and the nurses and the hospitals can handle is if we stay home and we avoid human contact to prevent the further spread. This morning, April 4, we were informed that we had 9 more new cases of the coronavirus here in Schuylkill County. That now brings us up to 77. Which means it's increasing every day. We know definitely we're probably going to break 100. And, but there's no reason to break 100 if we prevent the spread of the disease by doing what the governor asks, what our authorities ask us to do. And that's important. We cannot be selfish and just say, well, I'm still going to do this and I'm still going to do that. Last night, I was watching some news, and I really want to caution you, do not watch 24 hours of news, because it's just going to destroy you spiritually and psychologically and emotionally. Find a good movie, find a good book, chat on the phone, but do not watch 24 hours of news, because it will drive you nuts. But last night there was the story of a bus driver in Detroit, and the stay-at-home order came, and they were asking people, please stay home, especially if you don't feel well. And he said a man got on the bus, and all he did was cough, and he did not cough into his elbow, he did not cough into a hanky, he just coughed and coughed and coughed. And he said all the people on the bus looked scared, and they began moving further and further to the back. And he said, I'm behind the wheel and I'm trapped. So after this guy got off the bus and the bus driver ended his shift, he got off the bus and he filmed a video asking people to be more conscientious, to stop being so rude. Well, that bus driver died yesterday, 4 weeks after this guy got on the bus. We do not know who has it. You know, sadly, the coronavirus now, we're discovering that 25% of those who have the disease never know they have the virus, and all they do is carry it from person to person. And yet if you talk to the nurses, they will tell you the rigors from the fever, the chills, the shakes that they have is unbearable. And then as they gasp for breath, you know, as the pneumonia sets in. So I'm not trying to scare you to death, but I'm also trying to tell you, don't risk things. It's not worth it. You know, let your family help, let neighbors help, limit your trips to the store. If you're not feeling well, be conscientious of the people that are working so hard to keep milk in the stores and toilet paper on the shelves and bread. You know, let's truly be Christian over this. Now, let me conclude by just making these remarks about isolation. In the movie The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, after Jesus was arrested, There is a scene where things got quiet. Jesus was roughly treated. He was confined to a very small prison cell, and he's in a very cramped quarters. His hands are bound above his head. He cannot lay down. He cannot sit down. And the Blessed Mother is laying on the ground at that very same spot. And she has her hand on the ground where Jesus is trying to flex his hand. I don't know if they knew that each other were there. But we're never, ever far from the hand of God. And I know with the death of my mom and my dad, that God is never far from us. God is always there for those who believe and those who call his name. Sadly to say, just like these people who think they could beat the coronavirus on their own and go out and they're indestructible, they're trusting in themselves and not trusting in God and people that God has made a lot smarter than us to understand. This isolation, I'm receiving so many emails, so many phone calls from people. Father, this is terrible, being cooped up in my house, and during Holy Week, we can't even get to church, and what about Holy Thursday, and what about Palm Sunday, and what about Good Friday? Well, as faithful, we have to make that spiritual communion, as in all our videos, and we have to make Jesus really come alive in our heart. And we do that through being careful, and yet also being vulnerable the way Jesus made himself vulnerable, making those care calls to people, saying, do you need something from the store? Today alone, I received 3 phone calls from people saying, Father, your job is very important to us. We're going to the store. Do you need something? That's the kind of stuff we need to do. And we also need to, as I said, follow what the governor asks us to do. Imagine being socially isolated from God. And yet we do that every day with sin. We know when we sin. We know when we hurt other people. We know when we do wrong. We know when we use and abuse other people. And every time we sin, we socially isolate ourselves from God. As with the case of mortal sin, our soul dies. It's hard sometimes to be a Catholic Christian. It's hard to avoid the temptations of sin. But Jesus in his humanity showed us that we can do that if we but believe in him, if we but turn to him. And so there are the thoughts of today. Imagine what it was like for those poor lepers at the time of Jesus, where they had to wear a bell around their neck, they had to scream unclean, unclean, what that was doing for them. No one had reached out to them and no one cared for them except Jesus. And Jesus embraced them, and Jesus cured them, and Jesus made a difference. And Jesus is going to make a big difference in this coronavirus. And so maybe this loneliness that we're feeling, this isolation that we're feeling, I don't think it's a punishment from God, but maybe it's a wake-up call. So, last time we talked, I had my little worrying Jesus, and he's been with me an awful lot. And I really wish I could remember where we got this, because I'd get him a case of these and I'd give them to everybody I could give one to. But he's worrying about us, but he wants us to be very close to him. And we ask him to help us with all our anxieties and all our worries. Once again, please socially distance yourself. Please stay at home. Please self-isolate. It's the only way these brave doctors and nurses are going to be able to help cut the curve. And the more sick people that go to our hospitals with the coronavirus puts them in more and more jeopardy. So as we begin to get ready for Holy Week this week, as we celebrate Palm Sunday this weekend, let's welcome the King into our lives in an ever greater way. May God bless you and keep you safe.